used to think that the world is civilized, that the conspiracy theories and the lies and the slander and the libels were all part of the ancient past. But it's not even possible that in our day and age, society as a whole will be able to believe the conspiracies, to believe the lies, to believe the libels. So what on earth happened after October 7th? Remember the first days after October 7th? The world was finally in support of Israel, but that only took a few days until there was this attack on the hospital in Gaza. Within minutes, Hamas published exactly the amount of casualties and blamed Israel for it. The story ran circles around the world before it was discovered that it actually was not an Israeli rocket. It was actually a misfired Hamas rocket on their own hospital, which is used as a terror base. But ever since then, support has moved against Israel. Israel is the villain. Israel is somehow responsible for October 7th. What happened with the West and the Palestinian lie? Listen to this eloquent explanation by British journalist and commentator Melanie Phillips as she lays it out on the table.
I think there's a problem in the West about how people in the West see the Palestinians in general. I'm not actually persuaded that the vast majority make a distinction between Hamas and the Palestinians. I think that they think that Hamas is just the more extreme version of a perfectly reasonable point of view, a reasonable resistance movement. That they don't approve of murder and torture and kidnap. Of course, if you're British, you don't approve of that. But nevertheless, the cause they're fighting for is a perfectly just one.
Hamas is like the IRA, let's say?
Yes, it's rather similar. Some people think that. Some people in Britain do understand that the Hamas have done what they've done and they stand for what they stand for. But the real problem in the West and in Britain in particular is, as you suggest, support for the Palestinians in general and the refusal to believe that they are that they represent a cause that is a bad cause. People in the West, in Britain, believe, insofar as they think about Israel at all, and a very large number don't think about Israel at all, but insofar as they think about it and they kind of take a side, the elites, they will take the Palestinian side because they believe in the lie that's been told for the last half century that the indigenous people of the land of Israel were the Palestinian Muslims. Along came the Jews after the Holocaust because of sympathy for their plight. The Western world plonked them down in Palestine, where they drove out the indigenous population, and those Muslims who were left, those Palestinians who were left, they have oppressed ever since. That's basically what people believe. And they believe that because they don't know history of Israel, they know none of the history of the Jewish people, none of the history of the Middle East. And because they're told this all the time by their mainly left-wing university teachers and so on, they have no idea that the Jews are the only people for whom the land of Israel was ever their national kingdom, centuries before Islam was even created. They have absolutely no idea at all. So there's ignorance and ideology, because they think that the Palestinians are like other developing world peoples, poor and oppressed because they've got brown skins. They think Israel is a white-skinned population and is therefore, it must be white because it's Western and it's an adjunct of America. If you tell them that the majority of Israelis are brown or black-skinned,
like me, well, I'm not black-skinned, but
they can't process this. So there's all of that, but I think that Israel itself has a lot to answer for in this misapprehension. The Jewish communities of the diaspora have a lot to answer for, because nobody has actually told the truth about this. In the Jewish communities of the diaspora, particularly in Britain, which is what I know about, I would say the majority believe in a two-state solution. Why do they believe that? Because they believe basically that this is a fight over land. Because this is how it's been projected for a century. That you have a piece of land, you have two peoples, the Jews, the Palestinians, each of which has a claim to the land. We in the West can't arbitrate over that claim, but clearly if you have a piece of land being fought over by two contesting parties, what you do is you negotiate, you bang heads together, you make them separate the land, but you make them divide the land between them. End of problem. That's a two-state solution. One lot has that, the other lot has that. Very neat. The problem is that the problem to which this is the solution is not identified correctly. It is not a problem over land. It is not a problem over the division of land. If it was a problem over the division of land, it would have been solved in the 1930s when the Palestinian Arabs were offered part of the Holy Land as a state of their own, and they refused and went to war instead to prevent the Jews from having a homeland in any part of that land. That has continued ever since. The Palestinian cause is one of exterminating the state of Israel and removing Israel as a Jewish homeland altogether. And not only is Palestinianism aimed at removing and destroying Israel and removing the Jewish homeland, it's also based on the big lie which rewrites the Jews out of their own history in the land. It pretends that the indigenous people of the land were the Muslims, the Palestinians, and that the Jews are interlopers, where in fact the reverse is true. The indigenous people of the land are the Jews, and the Palestinians do not exist as a people. They say it themselves. They've said it themselves over and over again. We invented it. We invented it in order to twist the minds of the West and in order to present ourselves as having a claim to the land. So this is a lie from start to finish, a big lie. Now, bad enough that the universities have been pumping this out for 4 or 5 decades, bad enough that they have been backed by a very sophisticated, hugely financed, very intelligently calibrated campaign by the Palestinian by Palestinian supporters, by Palestinian Arabs and their supporters in the world to fry the minds of the West. Bad enough that's all happened, but it's happened in the way that it has no argument is permitted against this myth, this lie, because of the silence of the Jewish people themselves, the silence of Israel, the silence of the Jewish diaspora. They may inveigh against, as they do, the excesses of Palestinian rejectionism. They may say, at most, Israel will say, they don't want a state of their own, they want to destroy us. Absolutely correct. But what Israel doesn't say, and what the Jewish community doesn't say, is that this is not a fight over land. This is an Islamic-inspired holy war against the Jewish homeland on the basis that the Jews cannot be allowed to live in their own homeland and rule themselves. It's against Islam. And that's what it actually is. And Israel doesn't say it. And Israel doesn't say the Palestinians are not actually Palestinians, that Palestinianism is a thing that was invented in order to create a myth, but that actually, if you look at what the Palestinians so-called are saying, they're not talking about a two-state solution. They're not even talking about Israel. They're talking about eradicating Jews. Here are the videos. They're all on Memory, the wonderful website that translates all these videos. They're all there. Israel virtually never uses these things. It never says to the West, your two-state solution is the answer to a problem you have yourselves misidentified, and that you are the reason this is continuing. your support for this false cause is the reason that it continues. Nobody says that from Israel, and nobody in the Jewish community says that in Britain. Nobody. Nobody says the whole thing is based on a lie. Palestinianism is rubbish. There is no such thing as the Palestinian people. This is a lie invented to destroy us in Israel as a physical country and to remove us as Jews from our own history. It is the worst and most savage kind of cultural appropriation conceivable. That's what's going on, and it's fried all your minds. They're not saying that. So how can anyone know this? And so when you ask, how can we solve this problem of the West saying, well, the Hamas are bad, but Palestinians are good? The way through that is to say individual Palestinians may be fine. Some of them undoubtedly just want a happy life. They are the victims of their own people. These are the ways in which they are the victims of their own people. But they've been told a lie. You're being told a lie. The lie is that the Palestinian cause is a just cause. It is an evil cause. This is why it's evil. And it is evil because it not only wants to destroy Israel, the only country in the world which is targeted for annihilation, it wants to remove the Jews from their own history. And it's evil, and you should be opposing this at source. You should, the West, not be funding these people. You should not be funding the Palestinian Authority. You should be treating them as political, diplomatic, and social pariahs. Pariahs. Instead, you're treating them as statesmen in waiting. You're treating Israel as the rogue element in this because it dares not to want to be annihilated. That's what Israel should be saying. It doesn't say any of this. It could be said, it should be said, and it's not a question of, how can you show people that there is no distinction between Hamas and other Palestinians. It's how do you show people that the Palestinian cause itself is based on a lie and is the source of intellectual and moral corruption in the West, which has knocked the West, in my view, completely off its moral compass. I think the importance of the Palestinian cause to the moral, intellectual, and cultural disintegration of the West, which is underway, cannot be overestimated, because it is the quintessential example of how you no longer, as a Western society, you are no longer able to distinguish between truth and lies, victim and victimizer, and as a result, you take the side of the aggressor over the victim, and you punish the victim by upholding the lies. And this has, I think, cut a swathe through Western society and Western culture far beyond the issue of Israel and the Middle East. I think it's acted as a kind of moral cancer. Palestinianism is a moral cancer in the West, which has corrupted its intellectual elites, fried the collective brain, and destroyed the West's ability to distinguish truth from lies, and the ability, therefore, to defend its own way of life.
So brilliantly stated. The war between Israel and the so-called Palestinians is not actually a war of land at all. This war is unlike any other war in the world. I mean, think about Russia invading Ukraine. What does Russia want from Ukraine? They just want land. They don't want to kill the Ukrainians. They actually want the Ukrainians to be Russians. When it comes to the Palestinians invading Israel on October 7th, their goal is to erase, annihilate the Jewish people. And that's why we say in Passover, during the Seder, Shebechol dor vador, that in every generation, Omdim aleinu lechalotenu, they stand upon us to annihilate us. I cannot think of another nation in this modern world today that is facing the threat of annihilation. That there is a nation out there that doesn't want their land, that doesn't want their resources, that maybe disagrees with their religion. No, this is none of that. This is entirely irrational. This is about erasing the Jewish people off the face of the earth. And that hatred is not only a Palestinian hatred, it's a hatred which comes from the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian Western countries who are jumping on the bandwagon to hate the Jews because of Gaza, because of October 7th, because of the Iran war. It's a threat. It's an animosity which seeks to uproot the Jew from his own homeland. What's really interesting is that the word Palestinian in Hebrew comes from the Hebrew word which means invader. Polesh means an invader or an intruder. This is an ancient word which comes from the Philistine people who literally invaded the land of Israel. And that's why when they invented this term, the Palestinians, in the early 1960s or mid-1960s, how ironic it is that the very term Palestinian in Hebrew means invader. And which land are they invading? The land of Israel, which is so clearly the land of the Jewish people. You know, next week, we're beginning a period called the 3 weeks, which begins on the 17th of Tammuz. On the Hebrew calendar, this marks the date of the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem. When Jerusalem ultimately fell at the hands of the Romans in the year 69 CE, and previously on the same date, on the 9th of Av, it fell in the year 586 BCE to the Babylonians. Jerusalem has been the capital of the Jewish people for 2,500 years at least. And we have been fasting every year on these dates, on the date of the beginning of the siege and on the date of the fall of Jerusalem, every single year for 2,500 years. That's a solid 1,000 years before Islam ever saw the light of day. Anytime you see a menorah, a Hanukkah menorah, it celebrates the Jewish people driving out the invading Greek forces 2,200 years ago. The sight of a menorah is proof of the Jewish people living in the land of Israel 2,200 years ago. That's a solid 700 years before Muhammad was ever born. To say that the Jewish people are colonializers, colonists, invaders, is to literally rewrite history. It is a hatred which is irrational, has no connection to rhyme, reason, or facts. It is a hatred which seeks to entirely invalidate the existence of the Jew. Any normal person with a brain in his head will understand that you cannot rewrite history. Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. That's why it's called Israel. It's the only country in the world that's called the Promised Land, because it's the only country in the world that was promised by God to a nation on this earth. Those that bless us will be blessed, and those that curse us will be cursed. There's no way getting around it. God protects his people. God stands with his children, and those who fight his children fight him as well. May goodness and kindness prevail for all people all over the world.